Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today I'm joined by the lovely Hillary White as we begin our Best Picture Countdown series. In case you missed it, over the next couple years, ahead of Oscars 100, we're going to be looking back at Oscar Best Picture winners throughout Academy Award history, starting today with Wings, coming as the very first winner of Best Picture. Obviously, we're going to talk about if we enjoy the film, if we like the film, and the film's merits, but we're also going to discuss its achievement winning Best Picture, why it might have won the award, and we're going to go ahead and debut the ClapperCast Best Picture scorecard as we take a look and see where this ranks against our 5 different categories. Thank you so much for listening and joining us today as we discuss Wings and we begin our trek through Oscar history. Without further ado, let's get to our full review for 1927's Wings. Hillary, thank you so much for joining me on call today to discuss Wings. This is our first, in case anyone missed our announcement of the series, about once a month. You know, some months maybe we'll do 2, some months maybe we'll skip. But we're going back through the next couple of years, reviewing and re-looking at some of the Best Picture winners. Definitely not all of them. You know, eventually everyone is going to have an experience during the series where there's a film that's like, we're really going to have to skip this, but we really have to. We're going to get through probably about 30 total. Which out of 100, so about a third of the Best Picture winners, really going through, giving some context for their wins. We're going to obviously review the film, talk about do we like the film, but also throughout this, hopefully discovering some narrative and some conversation on the history of American film, the history of recognition of film within America, and we'll see what else we discover on the way. But starting out, the very first Academy Awards, May 16th, 1929, almost 100 years ago, with Wings. So the ceremony took place at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, hosted by Douglas Fairbanks. I will say this, basically, if you follow the Oscars today, this does not, you will not see that within this. It was a 15-minute ceremony because it was not meant to announce the winners. The winners were announced ahead of time. The nominations were announced in February of 1928, so over a year before the ceremony, which is a little bit strange because the eligibility, if you are not an Oscar historian, it's a little bit weird because now we have a really clean process where it's like January 1st to December 31st. But for these first few years, the eligibility goes from August 1st to July 31st of the next year. So you have some 1927 films in here, some 1928 films. Doesn't help that also premieres at the time are very odd, where you will get a New York premiere and an LA premiere and then a wide premiere, and it's a whole thing. So if you're going back and trying to figure out all the date stuff for this, it can get a little bit messy. There was no broadcast of the ceremony. 3 films were nominated for Best Picture, called Outstanding Picture at the time. You have Wings, which we'll talk about now as the winner. We have The Racket, and we have Seventh Heaven. However, I also have to mention there was a Best Unique and Artistic Picture category, which at the time they were like, this is Best Picture number 2, kind of similar to the Golden Globes, where they have a musical comedy and then they have a drama. Except retroactively, they were like, this is not a Best Picture. It does not count. So sorry, Sunrise, sorry, Chang, and sorry, The Crowd. You're not Best Picture nominees, despite at the time kind of being that. Though I also don't really get the distinction between these categories because, like, looking at The Crowd, I get Chang, but like looking at Sunrise and looking at The Crowd especially, I would say The Crowd is like just as experimental in many ways as Wings are. So I really don't get it. As far as nominations for the night, Seventh Heaven led with 5, followed by Sunrise with 4, followed by The Circus, Charlie Chaplin's film, with 3. However, those were eventually taken away and they just gave him a special award. So those got removed. As far as winners, Seventh Heaven led with 3. Sunrise also had 3 wins. And then Wings, our film today, had only 2. And getting into Wings, nominated and won, again, 2 categories, Outstanding Picture and Best Engineering Effects. To date, it's the only silent film to win Best Picture, premiered throughout 1927 and 1928 before having a full release on January 5th, 1929. It was a massive success. We'll get into this. I think it's pretty clear why, especially if you look at society at the time, but this was a huge success. People were so shocked by the footage within this that they thought the director took just footage from World War I and just were projecting it. They thought they were seeing reality of war on the screen, which they were not, which is pretty crazy. Had a huge production. Normally productions went a couple months. This went 9 months, filmed a lot in Texas, getting the aviation down with help of the government and the army who sent planes to help out. So 98 years later, here we sit today talking about Wings. Hillary, I will turn it over to you first. Now that we have a little bit of context with where we are, what are your thoughts on Wings? Was this a first viewing and was it a revisit? And then what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, that's a really good place to start. This is not the first time I've seen this film. I'm not entirely sure how many times I've seen this movie. And my interest in it is mainly two things. If you invest yourself into film history, of course, at some point you're going to become curious and think, hey, what was the first film that won an Academy Award? And then I think my other in with this was the work of Clara Bow as a performer at the time. And I think I probably ended up learning about her career and her life and seeing some of her films first that eventually led me to Wings. So heading into this, it's very different from the other films that she did. And it was very interesting to revisit this because I realized she appeared in 6 films in 1927, which gives you an idea. This is just a snapshot of one person, but how hard they worked, their actors, their crews, their directors. They were churning out films at a breakneck pace. And it's no surprise that a lot of people, ended up burned out or having problems with alcohol or drugs later just because they needed to sustain that breakneck pace. So this is the only war epic or like really expansive story that I've seen this performer appear in. And there's a lot of other performances worth pointing out too, which I'm sure we'll get into, but it's I think immediately talking about Richard Arlen and talking about Buddy Rogers, and of course the director William A. Wellman, who I don't know a terrible amount about, but watching this film and knowing very, very basic things about his life, he was someone who was a fighter pilot at some point. There are things in this film that I can't help but think there's no way they could have made this up, that there's experiences that are either from him directly or other people that he was in the military with that ended up in this film. And that adds an entirely different dimension to this war film that some of war films don't necessarily have. So those are my like opening thoughts on it, but I want to know yours, Carson, because was this the first time for you or no?
It was not. I, similar to you, went back. I was like, oh, what's the first Academy Award winner? Oh, it was Wings. Let me give it a go. And I really enjoyed it on a first viewing, despite the fact that, and if you follow this podcast, you will know I do not love the war genre, especially the modern war genre. I have a lot of issues with just kind of how and this is no shade to any filmmaker or no shade to any film. And if you love the war genre, good for you. I think it typically just is like a very boring setting that is often used as an excuse for like the most basic portraits of masculinity. Can we just start saying slurs, please? It feels like a director or a screenwriter is like begging to have the chance just to use homophobic slurs. It just never, for me, is a space that I really appreciate. But with Wings, completely different, especially on a rewatch. I love this film. And I learned on a rewatch, and if nothing else, if this series is a disaster, I will always be grateful that it at least showed me that William A. Wellman is like somehow one of my favorite directors of all time. I started going through his work and I was just like, oh, for in preparation of this, I guess I'll watch A Star is Born. I've been meaning to watch A Star is Born, the original. Never saw it. So I watched it and I was like, this is a 5-star masterpiece. I guess I'll check out another one of his films. And every time I finished one of his films, I just immediately wanted to watch 5 more. And I think Wings is like such a prime example of his brilliance. Number one, as you mentioned, super authentic. He was a fighter pilot. He fought in this war. A very new director also then. I was like, what's the timeline then? Because this is coming like 9 years after the war ended. He started making films, I want to say 1923, but that's off the top of my head, but like around there. As you mentioned, like 5 films a year is the schedule they would pump out. So like he got plenty of experience very, very quickly, but still a rather new director. But absolutely using his both memories of war, his opinions on war, his skills of war to produce this feature and make this film that I wouldn't say necessarily is like the most realistic depiction of war, but it certainly has so much realism in its emotions and in its stories. And he came out later in life saying like, I lost a secret wife I had during the war, no one knew about. He married someone in Europe and then she died, I guess, during the war due to a bombing or something. So he has a deep connection to the subject, and it really is remarkable just how like effective this is. And I think one thing with Wellman is every single one of his films is so ambitious in filmmaking and is so ambitious in scope, where even this is a silent film. I don't know if I've ever seen a silent film to this scale, to this level, not just with the flying sequences, which are standout. You have so many flying sequences where literally he was just like, let's put a camera on a plane, inventing this technology as he apparently did throughout his career. I love that we have apparently shotgun microphones now, because he was like, this is stupid having to be static. Let's just make a new microphone. He's very much so like this DIY guy. But those are obviously stunning sequences where even nowadays, the scale of that and actually being on those planes and those actors really flying, it really does hold up. But there are so many shots from, I mean, obviously the iconic in the Paris Cafe zoom through the tables, but also even there's a scene early on where they're on a swing set and the camera's like mounted on the swing set to where it's swinging with them. There's so much here that is using so much effort from the filmmakers and the actors and the director. But that's just like a staple of his work. So I found it very infectious from a filmmaking perspective. And then the emotions, which we'll get into, I think it lands. I think this is a film that understands war, understands what it wants to say about war, has a mature perspective, and is not afraid maybe of like speaking. And I to the nation, I guess. I don't really know what at this time period people thought of World War One. I don't know if they were grieving the war, saying that was this horrific event. I don't know if there was still the sense of patriotism that was like, hell yeah, war, we did this, we squashed them, we won, we did this. I don't know exactly where society was, but I think at least his perspective really speaks to a truth about war. I found really powerful. So I love this going into this.
I agree with you on that. I mean, obviously, we could say, well, yeah, we weren't there. So we don't really know how society was feeling at the time. And neither of us are historians, so we're not going to pretend. But while watching this again, I wondered if this film set a template for what an epic war film was supposed to be, and in both for better or for worse. Because I think the reason why Wings won the Oscar in the first place is because not only is it such a crowd pleaser, and in a way it is kind of war propaganda, but it very much crystallizes how America wants to see itself. And as the series goes on, I think we're going to encounter films time and time again, not every Best Picture winner, where it's very much about how America in particular, because that's where Hollywood is and where most popular films come from, how we see ourselves, which might be accurate, it might be wishful thinking, it might be completely off base. And there's going to be a lot of discussions about that. But what I find remarkable about this, and in tune with what you were saying, was it is war propaganda. Like I kept thinking about, like, for example, Top Gun in the 80s, where they figured out, oh, this could be used as a recruitment tool, or about the homoerotic tensions that are talked about in this film. And it made me think about Jarhead, years and years later, where it's like, it's so straight, it starts becoming gay, but in an entirely different way than Wings. Wings is its own specific brand of storytelling, as far as like exploring relationships between soldiers and officers and all sorts of stuff. But the fact that it glorifies war, but it's also critical of war. It's a very complicated portrayal of that particular place and time. And personally, for me, there's something about World War One in particular. I can't say like, one war is worse than the others, but for some reason, World War One is incredibly hard for me to watch. And this one in particular is a bit different because it's up in the skies and it's shot in a very innovative, kind of thrilling way. Just like 3 years later, I think Hell's Angels came out, which also had, these audience pleasing flying and fighting spectacles, but this one was first. So I don't know if that's a place to start as far as this being a template for not only war films, but propaganda and what is going to be the big tentpole thing
Yeah.
that everyone likes.
Did you know you could be listening to this episode of ClapperCast early? Well, if you go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/ClapperCastPodcast, there are 3 different tiers that you can choose from, each with their own means of support and each with their own means of rewards. You can get access to early episodes, bonus monthly episodes, bonus reviews. You can see our schedule early. Of course, thank you everyone who's already joined us on Patreon, and we hope to see you over there soon. Well, and I will admit that in preparation for this, was trying to watch other stuff just from this era, just to get a little bit more of a context. So I'm going to possibly mistake some stuff between this and Seventh Heaven, which also at the end has like an extended war sequence. In that film, I have no idea why it's there. Don't even get me started on Seventh Heaven. I don't think it's that good of a film. Here, I think what works for me is how this film, yes, it does glorify in the sense of like accomplishment and power as these 2 men go through the system and they get their planes and they go out on the skies, and as soon as the camp gets attacked, they're the first ones to rush out, and they're out in their planes going across enemy lines. That all comes off as very cool. It comes off as very respectable. It comes off as very powerful. At the end, you also get this clear visual of like a celebration when you return. You did something good. You did something noteworthy. But continually, the film, I would say, goes out of its way to really establish the sense of, and maybe it's not as graphic or as haunting as maybe it should be at times. But there's a real threat of death, even in the training. The guy they meet, they go into their tent thing, their cabin tent, and they meet the guy who they're rooming with, and he immediately is like, okay, I'm gonna go out and fly on my little test run, and he dies. He crashes and dies immediately. Obviously, it's a very tragic film for one of our main characters. I do think there's enough here that really talks about the sense of death and the sense of tragedy, and at the end you get that poignant statement. Spoiler alert, I guess. I assume these are going to be spoiler filled, but you get that statement of, it's not you, I don't blame you for the death of my son. I blame the war. This is the tragedy of war. Maybe that's not condemning war itself as a concept. You could say it as like a needed evil. But I do think there's enough here to where I felt like it did a good job being honest with the tragedy that comes from this, and not just saying, look, you can go shoot a lot of people and it's so cool and it's so fun and you'll come home and you'll be rewarded as a hero and you'll feel great about your life. We'll get into maybe some other parts of the ending. I don't know if I love the fact of how this actually like completely ends.
No.
We'll
get there.
I have a lot of issues actually with that plot in general as it produces throughout the film. But I do think this film does enough to where I don't think it's blind propaganda. Well, maybe it does look cool. And I think at the time, obviously, if you want to fly a plane, it's the new technology showing like how cool these dogfights look. I could see that being exciting for someone, for a young man. But I don't think it's blind to what it is talking about either.
No, and it humanizes everyone. I mean, it's worth pointing out that I think it's Cadet White. He's played by Gary Cooper in an early role, and it's interesting because it's like this cameo. It wasn't a cameo at the time because people didn't know who he was, but it ended up getting a lot of attention. That even someone who has those leading man looks, and is extremely handsome and seems very capable of his job, he can die during a practice run. Anyone can die at any time. Nobody is safe. We need to make that known to the audience, but not in a way that's incredibly depressing or threatening. Someone also pointed out that there was the Hershey's bar after he left, and someone asked, was that the first product placement in a film? And I thought, I don't know about that. I'm not enough of a film scholar to know, but it is a fascinating question to ask. But also asking, why would you put that after a horrendous death in a film? So aside from the people that we're seeing on the American side, I also noticed that there is time taken to also humanize the enemy. As far as German soldiers, I think in particular, they do show, German officers removing dead German pilots from their planes. There's the shot of the one dead German soldier lying on the Iron Cross on the ground. And also, making it clear that there are rules in war. One of the scenes that really took me by surprise was the scene where Richard Arlen is flying around and he's in a dogfight with a German soldier and his machine gun jams. He can't shoot. The German soldier sees that and he says, okay, well, that's not fair. And he kind of salutes him in a really friendly way and flies off. That even in these really intense battles, that there is like some sense of like chivalry or propriety, which I think you and I, neither of us have been in the military in a combat situation. It would be interesting to hear about people who have been in those since World War II or World War I, World War II, going on from that. It's like, is that even a thing anymore? Or does that still happen? It tends to humanize both sides. And I found that very interesting.
Unless Manifest will never be in combat. Unless, I guess, I shouldn't speak for you. I don't know if that's your goal in life. It's not my goal in life. I don't imagine you want to be in war. I shouldn't close down any of your stores.
I'd be so easy to kill. I know that. So
yeah.
It's not my goal.
No, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. Don't put me in. It's not going to work for you. I'm not the team player for that. But even there's also the scene when they gun down their friend or they think he's dead, and then they send the one pilot over to drop the note to let them know that he died and where the body is. There was definitely that element of like war oftentimes is portrayed and is so chaotic and it's so crazy and it's so you never know when the enemy is going to attack and you're villainizing the enemy. I thought it was interesting showing just how I don't know about mundane, but just how like there's a system to it. There is a security, I guess, to how both sides are operating that I found interesting. I also like when he drops into the not enemies, but the other trenches, the French trenches, and they're like actively shooting, like actively. This is the war zone, and they're like, "Do you want to come have a drink? Like, what if we come and just enjoy ourselves for a little bit?" And it's like, what are you talking about? This is like an active combat. The guy next to you is like shooting at them coming, but I guess we can just go down and have a little drink and enjoy our bunker. Like, I thought it was very interesting. But again, I think that a lot of that comes from the director and his experiences. And I assume this is authentic to World War One. I don't know if it's authentic now, but I guess I'm working with that assumption. I could be wrong.
I think it's a British trench he ends up in, because I think the officer says something like, "Welcome to our merry little war," which is like the most British thing to say.
Yep.
But it does make me wonder. That was a moment where I thought maybe something like that happened, but at the same time, I just don't know. It's like, okay, you've been through enough. How about you have a drink while everyone else fights? Because at the same time, I was thinking, you're in the middle of a battle, exactly like you. It's like, maybe we should be focusing on this other than getting a drink. But maybe there's moments like this where things have to happen in order to not go completely insane, because there were aspects of that war, and I think especially that battle scene near the end where they just show everyone getting razed, everyone getting machine gunned, everyone getting blown up, and it's pretty relentless. And then I noticed one shot, and I thought, why are they showing this one guy with this one line? I looked it up, and it is Wellman. Did you realize he had a cameo in this?
I had no idea. Wow.
It was so great because I think it's at some point the plane swoop down and they start like machine gunning the enemy, which is absolutely horrible. But it shows the soldier lying face down on the ground, and he looks up at the sky and he says like, "Attaboy, like get those buzzards." And I thought, wait, I don't know who that is. Is that a character? Am I not remembering this guy's face? And so I paused the movie and looked it up, and it's Wellman in a cameo.
I had no idea. That's so fun.
It's this little gift he gave us. He put himself in there, and I thought, okay, so at least I knew I hadn't been paying attention or something. Thought,
right.
Yeah. And I think the other thing we could address is we talked about the British trenches. They also show like the French soldiers. They show the Germans and the stuff like that. But there's also that Dutchman who's in the early scenes and really advocate where it's at a very basic 1927 level. I think people don't understand that a lot of immigrants were coming to America that are considered white now, but they were not considered Americans back then, whether they were Irish or from the Nordic countries. Italians in particular and Spanish people really looked down on and called slurs all the time and considered enemies. This
Hmm.
Dutchman character um, is just he is comic relief, but I think he's also there to telegraph to the audience that we do live in a nation of immigrants, and that immigrants want to fight just as much as we do. There were probably German Americans who or German immigrants who fought in the war, just the
Hmm.
same as like Japanese American soldiers fought in World War II. And it's important to get that across. So it's once again, it really adds to the fact that this is a really complex
Yeah.
war film, that it's trying to cover everything, and yeah.
And I think like it is comic relief. He gets by every time because he has this little American flag tattoo, and he when he flexes or whatever, it waves, and like all the Americans are like, "Oh my god, I love this." Um, so I get at the time, I could see someone, I guess, nowadays saying like, "Well, that's not really great representation of the topic." But I do think at the time, I think it's very important to
Mhm.
include. I think having a character like that who you make the audience, again, you got to think of the audience at the time, who majority of them has probably this racism within them, has this idea of negativity, to create a character that they sympathize with and they love to see, and that they see as fighting for the good cause in, I guess, quotations, for America. I do think there's a power within that, and I do think, yeah, I mean, it did not need to be there, but I think it's lovely. Like it's a statement that it is there because it doesn't need to be there. Same with showing women in the war and the role of women in the war. Why I don't love. We'll get into Clara Bow's, I guess, role in the film. I think as a performer, though, she's quite good. I appreciate that it showed that like women were also going over to
Mhm.
Europe, where ambulance drivers were participating in the war. This was not just for I think the men that we maybe have the imagery of. There's a lot more happening when we go to war. I appreciate that perspective also.
Yeah, I kind of missed his character. I think at some point I wrote down a note. I said, "Hey, I wonder what happened to that Dutchman. I would just like to see where he is right now." But he's
He
not the
does
focus of the
disappear.
film. He's supposed to be there to let people know, that I can't say so much for World War One, but I can say with World War Two that there was aspects of war propaganda as far as like pushing back on the Axis powers, which was
Mhm.
reminding America that our differences are our strength, especially in the face of Nazism in particular, where it's like, let's get rid of the crippled, the blind, the homosexuals, dwarves, Jews, people of other races. And there's actually a really great war propaganda broadcast. I'll have to see if I can find it and I can link it on my list I put on Letterboxd, where it's um it's a sketch about all the people working in the munitions factory, and it is people that basically Hitler would want to get killed, and the whole message is like, we embrace these people, you
Mm.
know, all of our differences, all these people from different countries, even like there's a German there, there's a blind woman there, there's an
Wow.
elderly person there, people who are handicapped, or just all these different people. And it's like, and we're going to use that and we're going to defeat you. And it's such a different tone, and it's so optimistic compared to I guess I suppose like what we're dealing with today. We're seeing the best of a specific time, and sometimes it's good to embrace that in a way, to remind us like people did have good intentions back then, even if it's very very basic. Like I don't think
Yeah.
the Dutchman could have been a black soldier, for example, or even a German soldier. I think that would have made people feel really
Yeah.
upset at the time. So they had to play it very, very safe.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Again, I mean, with all these films, especially these early ones, you can definitely look back and be like, "Oh, nowadays that's not really that impressive." But I do think it's quite strong, and I appreciate that aspect. I think it's well done for the era it's coming out in, the audience it's speaking to. I do wish though he didn't just disappear. That's a great point. There's so much of
Yeah.
this early film that is kind of, but I guess that's war. You we're lucky the bodies stuck together, but no one else really did from that initial group. One thing that I will get into, and I don't think the audiences at the time were very big into, and you kind of mentioned it already, there is a queer reading you can give to this film. These two guys grow very close. There is a kiss on the cheek at the end. One of the first or first queer kisses, I guess, let's say, though actually not the first. The first ever kiss recorded ever on film was a queer kiss, and like one of the like 1 second short little things. But do you subscribe to? I mean, I guess I can go first on this,
Yes,
and then
go ahead. I want to
I'm
hear what you have to say on
fascinated.
this.
I'm fascinated if you see it. I will say I don't think this is intentional. I'll be really honest. Like, I love the idea of coming in here and being like, "Oh my god, it's gay." The fact that this director and this filmmaker seemingly never included another queer reading in at least the filmography that I'm aware of, and granted, again, made what, 50, 70 features throughout his career, so maybe there's something buried within there, but from what I've seen, not necessarily like he's an openly, he doesn't identify as queer, at least, and again, this is not a theme we see a lot of, but I do personally, at the same time, and you can get into like, what does art say versus the intention of the artist, and how does that matter? I do read it as queer. I think it's a very queer story. I can see that reading entirely. While yes, there is this whole like Clairvaux element. Number one, other sexualities exist. You can like men and women, but also that's like added afterwards, whatever. Seeing these two men really grow this connection, really grow this intimate bond. I think there's absolutely, you can read. And again, when I watch this, I naturally get the idea and the notion that there is something deeper shared between them. Granted, this is also, I think, though, something with war. And when you go through trauma with others, and war is undeniably trauma, you get brought together on this way where it's like, you really, I think you have to conceptualize to yourself, what is love? What is romantic love versus platonic love? And I think sometimes in trauma, that can get twisted and can get muddied. But I see the queer reading in this. And when I watch this, I naturally do see the queer reading. But I would not personally say the director intended this to be gay. In the same way, like a James Whale project, you look and you can see the element of queerness. And I think it's very intentional. I think this is not necessarily the goal here. But do you see queerness in this film? Do you see this as being a gay feature? What do you see?
I will be honest, I see it too. And I don't only see it in, I mean, their relationship is not romantic. I don't read it that way. Obviously, they're very preoccupied with the relationship they have with Sylvia at home. The fact that she's never forgotten her, that she's still a source of tension in that relationship. And it seems to be genuine, does imply that these men are straight. But I think, like what you said, being in a very traumatic and high stress life or death situation with the men that you're fighting with for a long period of time, you do tend to get very close. And I think anybody who, if anyone happens to listen to this, who's been in combat situations, can probably ascribe to this. Like, yeah, you do have to be close with other people and work with them and care about them because you're looking out for each other. And very often in these situations, it becomes less about the war and more about just keeping yourself and these people you care about in your unit alive. Um, so the way I specifically read it is there are queer undertones to not only the relationship, but there's also queer representation or things that happen in this film that I think contemporary audiences would read as queer or were just not as comfortable with today, which I found incredibly fascinating. I think it's possible that I think it's obvious that queerness did not irritate Willman whatsoever, specifically because of that tracking shot where he goes through all the tables. One of those tables is two women, pretty much almost in male drag, romancing each other. He chose to have that in there, or there was a conscious decision to have these two women being in this space and, having a really wonderful time in Paris, just like anybody else. But there's interactions with the men as well, in the army, where I think it's just they're doing things and still considered tough guys that I think in 2025 would be considered kind of, queer or gay, or probably put down in a more, offensive term. Men putting their arms around other men's waists when they get pinned with the medals, they get kissed on not on their cheeks, but like right by their throat, which is like kind of a, I don't know, like a place where like someone who is your partner kisses you, and it goes on for a long time. And it seems the guy who's last in line, I don't know why they put that in there, but it seems like he's anticipating and enjoying it. And it could be right that he just really he's relishing the fact that he's getting a medal, but it could also be the fact that he's being kissed by a superior officer. There's a lot more affection. It seems like in 1927, affection between men was more tolerated than it is now. Maybe because it wasn't being questioned so much, What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it is interesting. And again, I'm not like an expert at the time. Obviously, I don't think like we were very, having pride parades. It's okay to be gay
Nope.
statements. But I do agree. I think there's a lot. I mean, even just in these films I watched in preparation for this, but overall, there's so much more about male connection, and male friendship and male physicality and physicalness. I would be fascinated to trace kind of where that goes away. I mean, certainly by the time we get to the AIDS crisis and we get into um, the conceptualization of sexuality during that time, probably, I guess maybe even like World War II, I think you get this much bigger sense of like masculinity, and we need to be strong against the enemy, and we need to fight back against the enemy. It's pretty wild though. I mean, it's pretty wild, like seeing this film, seeing it projected and people responded to this no problem, hearing your what you were talking about for World War II, and then thinking about where we are now as far as those like topics and about those like perceptions, and what perception do we need to have to be strong, and where do we subscribe strength to. And strength is not currently being, by some people, subscribed to as being diverse or being inclusive or being
Vulnerable. It's like
vulnerable. Exactly.
everyone's vulnerable in this. That's one thing
Yeah.
that's a little bit different than other war films for sure.
And there's even so much here about just like protecting the emotions of others, and being like, obviously, this is not at the time, male mental health is necessarily on the top of everyone's minds. But there's like the bit where he gets the letter and he doesn't want to give it to him during the war, because he doesn't want to hurt his feelings during war and take his mind off of like how good everything is going. There is stuff here about mental health that like, I do think it's ahead of its time, but maybe it's not really ahead of its time. Maybe we lost it between now and then, and this just was like open, and this is okay, and this is what it was, because it does feel so radical in some ways. I guess at least compared to where we are right now, which recording this in 2026 maybe is not the time to judge what is morally
earlier, but yes, we are in 2026 technically.
Maybe it's not the time to judge morally like what is normal in society and what isn't.
What we lost. I mean, it could also be read like in a negative way. It'd be very interesting, queer scholars, or people who know more about gay history at the time, whether it was more accepted to be that open about things because there was such a high level of denial where they're like, homosexuality doesn't exist, like that's not even really a thing. So it gave people who were queer more like more of an ability to maneuver and not be read as a threat as much until it became a threat. I'm fascinated by that kind of
I am too. And I'm fascinated. I mean, we've talked extensively on this podcast, so we don't need to fully get into it, but like James Whale was openly queer, right? Like he was openly gay, and he was getting the directing roles on these big monster franchises. And like, I don't know, queerness at the time, again, definitely under attack, definitely not trying to make a claim that like they had it easy and that it was just open and fine. But like, it is strange seeing how almost of a non-factor it was in certain places, in certain regards, that really would go against, I guess, your expectation for like the discrimination against queer people. I would love to learn more about that. I sadly am unknowledgeable, just to be honest, about how that was perceived in the 1920s. But there's so many films, like I'm thinking even like Chaplin's City Lights, which was 31, I want to say. I mean, obviously the Universal Monsters has queerness baked into them. There's so much about male friendship and male like camaraderie with like physicality that at the time that I've never really considered. It was just like, it was so common to see. I don't know, fascinating.
Yeah, it really, really is. And I think the more I learn about early Hollywood history, I think particularly in the 1920s, like you said, I think it's probably up until the Code, and especially like post-war, that they really started cracking down on that stuff. But there were a lot of directors and a lot of performers, for example, who were gay. And people kind of knew about it. And in some cases it was a big deal. And then with some people, like people just really left them alone and didn't care. So there's a huge variety of different experiences and stories.
The Code is
there.
What a great shout. Of course it was The Code, right? Like, I don't know how that took our minds. Like, I don't know how I went to anything but The Code. That literally like said, you can't be queer. Like, that was the initial time of like moral panic where all these things became villainized. And then we made them, we alienated them by just not including them in our media we consumed for decades and decades, and then they try to come back. There we go. Okay, we found it.
I think we did, yeah. And it's very depressing because then I think gay representation still was there, but I think I don't necessarily agree with this, but I have heard the argument that suddenly, like, especially like homosexual men were like they became villains. Like for some reason, the male villains were very feminine all of a sudden, or they had like very posh accents and things, which I don't necessarily read it that way, but it's had been pointed out. It's like no, that was done on purpose, and it was mean because it was a knock on gay men at the time. Um, yeah, so yeah.
I don't know if they were in a boardroom being like, we gotta
do
hit
this.
the gays. We gotta hit the gays. They're too ahead. They're standing too high right now. Let's take them out by making the villains queer. But I do think they pulled from a lot of queerness to create villains and generate villains. But I think that was more of like, what is villainized in society at the time that'd be effective rather. Well, I don't know. There's also, I guess I think about a lot of like Disney villains who you could read as queer. And I know this is jumping all over from Wings. We're sitting here I'm talking about Disney villains, Jesus. But I think there was also though a lot of comedians who found their comedy through expressions of like queerness and kind of plays on masculinity. And then oftentimes with animated features or just, I guess in general, you would see comedians take those roles, and I think maybe they just brought their shtick to it. I don't know.
I see it in some cases that it can be defiance as well. Like there was some people who were able to sneak in under the wire, and it's just like, I'm going to be extremely gay, but you can't do anything about it because it's still playing by the rules. I find that stuff amazing, and it's just like, go.
Oh my god,
it's like, go for it, absolutely do it. But this does capture a very specific time where it's, and I don't know, there are other films from that time period where it does seem like men were allowed to like hug each other, or be more like physically demonstrative with each other and still be straight, and it's like nobody cared. And eventually at some point, maybe it was the code or something. I think the code was definitely part of it, and then the conformity of the 1950s and all that sort of stuff. Suddenly everyone became really scared.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. I mean, I think that's probably the safest or like strongest narrative to go down for that. But I'm sure it was also, elements of other stuff. But I think the code is like, in many ways, if you talk about cinema, and I think everyone on this podcast loves cinema. I hope everyone would be who has like ever been on this podcast. It is sad seeing how good we look back and like, oh, cinema's pretty good. How good it could have been without the code. Even watching these films, like seeing that there were so many filmmakers who were so inspired, not even necessarily with like representation, but just like with depths of story, with perspectives of like heroes and villains, and then just knowing like pretty soon that's going to be bulldozed over and we're going to actually make it to where it's impossible to make those films. It's so like heartbreaking to think how many good stories will never be told because of that fucking code. But alas, yes. Maybe one of the worst moments like in history. I don't know. For me, like it really is one of the worst like things we've ever done. But
yeah, and I think the thing that the average person doesn't realize is how many decades that hung in there until it started getting bucked, like 40 years. Well, let's see. No, I think it really started taking root in the 30s. I think it was like 30 years. It wasn't until like maybe the 60s or something that they started realizing like audiences do not care. They do not care.
I think even then, like it really was until the 70s that we really started to kind of phase it out. It's crazy. Like it really is like all of American cinema up until like very, very like I think a perfect example is like basically the entire career of Hitchcock, because he made a film this time. This was, I think, one of his first films was 1927-ish or 1929-ish, actually, I believe, with The Lodger. And then it wasn't until like his final feature, which we covered, or one of his final features, which we covered last year, that he finally, the code ended and he was able to just be fully a pervert like he is. So to be honest, so
I have to say I did not enjoy that. I was like, I kind of liked it when you had to like keep things subtle.
That was our me though. That was our take on the podcast too. We were like, maybe go back to this. Not showing everything. Maybe I don't want to know your interests.
Yeah, I did. I now I know too much about you, and I don't like it.
Yes. But basically, so imagine the entire career of Hitchcock, which is decades and decades and decades of work. That's the Hays Code, and it's pretty tragic. But alas, it happened. We move on. But with Wings, I mean, I think Wings, luckily being pre-code, is allowed to do a lot more That's interesting. The one area of Wings that I think does feel very out of place is Clara Bow, I have to be honest. And I like her performance and I like her overall as an actress. And I know that this was written in later than the rest of the script. I don't know if it was before production started or during production, but she feels so like forced into this film. She really has three scenes. She has the very beginning, she has the very end, and she has the middle part. And it just feels so, while I do like the representation of women in the military, as I mentioned, it feels like such an afterthought, and I don't know why we keep going to her and why she keeps being such a force. I don't think her romance here adds much. I think it often distracts from what's more interesting. And then the ending, I don't love that this ends in just like this very happy, like, oh, we're holding each other and the star is shooting. That's not the story that was built for 2.5 hours. So for me, that was the one element here where I can't give this 5 stars, honestly, because there's just such a clear issue, which is, why is this character here? I don't know if you agree or if you disagree.
I have a theory, and this is a late breaking one because before doing these podcasts, I look around and try to gather some information. It's like, well, could it have been this or could have been that? I think if she was written in later, it was because she was such a sure bet at the box office. Investors were taught that if you will get like double your returns back if she's just in the film. So it's possible that they put her in there just basically for star power, which she has. She definitely has it, and she does bring she does bring her charisma and her screen persona to certain things. And there's some scenes that are amusing, like the first the revelation that she has become, a driver in the war, and she accidentally bumps a guy, and the guy sees that she's cute and pretends to be injured. That's really really funny, and that does seem like something from a Clara Bow film, but overall it is at odds from what the entire film is about. It could be, trying to bring in female audiences. It could just be, trying to make sure that that contrast is there as far as like these men. If there was any worries behind the scenes, it's like, I don't know, it's just all these men being close to each other. And then like one of them dies and they kisses the other. It's like, no, there has to be like women in there to remind the audience that there are women at home, or that they're still in love with, or the girl next door who is desperately in love with Jack, but it's just like, why, like, just Jack as a character, it's just like, I was just like, I think I wrote down, it's like, yeah, he's like, he's entitled to everything and sure is blind to a lot. I said he's a handsome idiot, you know and things really go his way, which in a way, I think specifically at that time and how we're perceived, like, that is America. We're just, yeah, like, we're just handsome idiots going around machine gunning people, killing people you actually care about, ignoring stuff. And we're still reckoning with that, almost 100 years later. But that's my theory about why she was there. It's just that she was so popular at the time and could bring like another dimension to the film. I do wonder though, like, if you took all of that out, what would happen to the film? Because I think it would leave some threads hanging about, like, well, what's going to happen to Jack now that he's home? Like, is where's he going to land? And at least like knowing she's there, and she doesn't tell him. I was so glad at the end he says, "Oh, I was with another girl," and she doesn't reveal that to him, because I thought, that's clever. You got to keep that ego in check, because that guy's ego is huge.
No, 100%. And I do think like there is a conundrum with this ending where I get why you don't want to end it on just the most depressing note after 2.5 hours. Like I get that. And her character allows the ending to be a happy ending and be positive and be hopeful. Not that films at the time needed necessarily a happy ending.
Mm-mm.
A lot of
Nope.
them did, but like The Crowd, which was
I was gonna
nominated,
say
like,
the ending of
that's
the
not,
crowd is ambiguous as hell. We were just like, oh, this is gonna still be horrible, but at least they're
yeah.
happy now.
No, it feels horrifying in like a very inspired way, to be honest. But
Yeah.
so I get why with Wings, like it does allow that crowd pleasing energy to come at the end of the film, which I think does help the film actually, like overall with its legacy and success and getting audiences to really appreciate it. Just for me, I felt a little after the thought. I guess I'd be curious. I would love an edit of this. ClapperCast, someone go make it of this without any Clara Bow in it. Though she is an icon, she's a queen. Her editing, she would like take all of her outfits and she was like, these are ugly as fuck. And then she would just like redo her outfits and like make them all like shorter and show more. And like everyone would be so mad at her, but like she just did it anyway because she's Clara Bow. I do appreciate her so much as a person and as a actor in this, but I would be fascinated narratively what would happen. I guess it'd probably be a lot more queer. It'd be a lot more gay if they just didn't obsess over this woman. I don't know.
I guess like Sylvia would still be there. Yeah, but she's so in the background. She ends up fading so quickly. It would be interesting to to explore an edit where she's not there. I don't think it'd be as funny, that's for sure.
Well, yes, I agree. It would be a little bit more serious and depressing, which fair enough. Yeah, because it is entertaining. I think that's kind of the hidden secret of Wings is yes, there's this depressing conversation, and yes, there's death, and there's the Shakespearean death as he guns down his friend unknowingly. But it's very entertaining. It's very fun. It's very watchable. I was really worried, even knowing I liked the film, going into this a 2.5-hour silent film, and like all the other films I watched in preparation were all like 70 minutes, 80 minutes. I was like, oh, this might be a struggle. I forgot just how watchable it is. Like really, I could turn this on, maybe not every day, but I certainly could turn this on regularly and have a good time with it. It gets me.
You're definitely not alone in that. I was aware that would not be an issue with this film, and there's two things about this that I want to communicate. One is that I do take notes during these films, and I quickly learned that I had to pause if I was going to take notes because this movie moves at a breakneck pace, especially at the beginning. And if you are writing down a sentence, you are going to miss something. And then the other thing I wanted to communicate is that going online and trying to gather information, like I said, preparing for this, you end up, coming across comments, reviews, sometimes even forums and things like that. It doesn't matter what age you are when you watch this or what generation you are, people engage with this. This is something that someone could watch now, whether like a teenager now, and they might think like, oh my God, a war film, 2 hours and 20 minutes, gag me, and they start watching and they're like, no, this is great. Like all I came across was just really positive reviews from people of all ages saying like, man, this still really holds up. And I was interested the entire 2 hours and 20 minutes, which just comes to show, why this film still holds up and has its legacy. It deserves its legacy.
No, I agree. And I know a lot of people watch this just because it was the first Best Picture winner, which automatically gives it this huge boost as far as attention and as far as people knowing about it. But it kind of can't, I think, get better than this as far as having a first Best Picture winner, because almost universally, again, everyone who watches this loves it. Everyone is like, wait, actually, this is really good. Actually, I've seen people talk about how like this is their gateway into silent films. Mm-hmm. I do like everyone who does this project of watching every Best Picture winner in order, because then they immediately get to the Broadway melody, which I don't know if you've got to, but it's horrible.
I have not seen that, no.
Horrible. And everyone then gives it 1 star and is like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not going to do this project, which is sad. But Wings gets them in. And yeah, I agree. I think even to this day, it is wild seeing like film Twitter people and like people who engage purely with like modern film. They will go back to this because of that placement as first Best Picture winner and engage with it and love it. So I think the legacy here, which we'll get to in a minute, I think it's phenomenal. And I think that speaks to how watchable it is, how well crafted it is, the emotions here, that even World War One, there's not a lot of films about World War One. This is obviously before society would change a lot with World War Two, and then obviously the next 100 years of war. The emotions still stand. They still stand as relevant even. There's so much here that you can talk about. As you mentioned, it's a very complex film. A lot of perspectives. It really is like, in my opinion, like kind of a masterpiece. And I don't think, even if there's maybe some other films I enjoy more from the list of this year, specifically, I would say Sunrise and I would say The Crowd probably are a little bit higher. I don't know. The Crowd is pretty even with this for me. I don't think there's another one of those that would be as effective and great and deserving of this position legacy wise than Wings. So shout out.
Yeah, and I mean, I did look into that. I thought, what else have I seen that came out in 1927? I mean, one that I ended up coming across, three. I mean, there's the three Clara Bow pictures because she was also in It and Children of Divorce, which also introduced Gary Cooper. She was dating Cooper at the time. I think that's why that's why he appears in Wings, and huge boost to his career, of course. Metropolis came out in 1927, but it's German, so obviously it was not nominated. Two Todd Browning films. So we had London After Midnight and The Unknown, Sunrise, like you mentioned, The Jazz Singer. So as far as like the first experiment with synced sound, not necessarily the best film, but it was a pioneer at the time as far as
Yeah.
introducing that possibility to audiences. And then there's two shorts I want to highlight. One is Chasing Choo Choos and The Battle of the Century. These are comedy shorts. I think it's like Monty Banks and then Laurel and Hardy. And The Battle of the Century is worth watching because comedy had reached a point where everyone was so tired of pie throwing. They thought, well, this will solve the problem. We'll make a short with so much pie throwing in it that no one will ever want to see a pie again. And it's ridiculous, but of course it didn't work. There was tons of pie throwing. So it was a pretty incredible
Yeah.
year just all around. But when I think about as far as what would win the Academy Award, as far as making people feel good, as far as like solidifying American identity, as far as like comedy and tragedy and romance and everything in between, it's still gonna be Wings. It
Yeah.
really did fit the bill, and it is a shame that I looked at the Best Picture winners recently, and I thought, okay, yeah, there's a few after this. It's like I don't know what these are. Or I don't really like these very much. So, but we got a strong start,
A very strong start,
very
yes.
strong. Yeah.
And yeah, I would say if anyone's not seen The Unknown, immediately recommend For The
Oh my
Unknown.
God.
Again, Sunrise is great, Metropolis is great. Going to 1928, of course, I love The Crowd, but also The Circus, Lonesome, I really appreciate.
Mhm.
I think
Oh,
Lonesome has like
Lonesome,
such
so
great
sweet.
visuals. So sweet. So many great New York City films also throughout all these, I will say. Like, and as someone who loves that city, it always warms my heart when they go to Coney Island and you get the beautiful,
Same.
whether it's at night or whether it's during the day, and it's just like I love it so much.
I put
Um,
together a list somewhere. It's just like all the Coney Island films.
yep.
It's like, oh, we're in New York. We're gonna go on a date, and it's like it's always Coney Island, and it's such a magical thing to
Oh yeah.
witness because it doesn't exist in the same way anymore,
Nope.
and we will never ever understand how much it blew people's minds because this is still like not too long after electrification of everything. The fact
Yep.
that things could light up at night, like that's
Ugh.
like it's crazy. It's like the invention of trains. Like I think trains and electricity and cars, we take that for granted. I think it's the equivalent of like maybe AI now and maybe the birth of the internet and stuff like that. That's like the closest we can compare our experiences with.
Oh, and just old New York City culture. I don't know if you've ever seen Speedy. I know it's from one of these years,
Hmm.
but he goes to Yankee Stadium, and like they also have like cameos from like Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth and all the players, and
Yes,
like I
yes.
don't know. There's something also like almost it's like anthropology in a way, to where it's like you get these films that capture and like this New York City that's gone, and it's such an interesting way to see how a society and the city has evolved. But also then you go back to these origins and you can actually see Coney
Hmm.
Island. I don't know, there's like such a power to that, where it's like you can see the rides at Coney Island, you can see the lights at night, you can see the train there. Like there's something about that really warms my heart in a way that like is very hard to describe. So I love those films.
Yeah, it's the strangest thing, and I don't know what the phenomenon is because obviously you and I are really attached to that, and we were not
Yeah.
there.
No.
And it is strange over the past year. I can't account for this either, but I have come across YouTube live streams of really old music from like the same time, maybe a few decades before and after. And there's a lot of people there who seem to be Gen Z and Gen Alpha who have
Hmm.
no connection to this music whatsoever, and they say, I really like they just love it so much, and they say like I feel like I'm home. And it's like, but that
Yeah.
home doesn't exist. But it is a phenomenon because I've had to hear that time and time again, and we experience that through music, we experience that through art and film, sometimes literature. I mean, we've all know people who've been really into books to the point where it's like they're willing to cosplay certain time periods. all that kind of stuff. Like, why do we feel home in a time period where we were never there?
That's such an interesting
It makes us feel
question.
so happy. And I don't know why.
Having nostalgia for events like in a time period we never experienced. It is
Hmm.
so, yeah, I've never thought about that, to be honest, but like it's so true. And I'm sure a lot of people at home listening or watching feel similar. It really is
Hmm.
powerful. Yeah, that's wild. Hillary, is there anything left with Wings before we get to our ending here that you would like to get into?
Uh, Not necessarily. I'm just like skimming my notes right now. I think that I have put across that as far as like our main character is Jack, and there's sometimes at the very, I think at the very end, my issue was like, did he actually deserve any of the good fortune that he reaped at the end? Being a war hero, and he gets Clarabout at the end, and it's just like he made a lot of mistakes, and it doesn't seem like there was um yeah, it seems like the
Yeah.
scales were not balanced, but he does have regrets at the end. But it's still just like, you're such an idiot, but I guess it worked out for you anyway.
Yeah, before the Clara Bow moment, it was like he's at this big parade, but you can tell like he might be enjoying it somewhat, but he's definitely
He's
like
not, yeah.
not there really, and he's definitely like not fully back to earth after all this events and trauma. But then of course the Claire Bow moment happens at the very end, and he seems okay. Aged, definitely like a different man than he was beforehand, but
Hmm.
I agree. I thought the ending maybe was just a little too. I think for everything the film builds, not to repeat myself, I just think it was a little too clean.
Hmm.
But with that, we can get into, instead of doing rapid reviews or questions of the weeks for these retrospectives, we're going to do something called the ClapperCast Best Picture Scorecard. So I have 5 categories. We're going to each give our number for each one. We'll go one by one, between a scale of 1 to 5, scoring on 5 different categories that you could say makes a great Best Picture winner. Then we'll take our total, and then throughout the series, we'll see how all these Best Picture winners stack up against each other on the scorecard. I thought it was a fun little idea just to kind of like give some numbers and give some quantitative data to our opinions. So our first category is going to be inventiveness. I think a good Best Picture winner somehow pushes the medium of film forward, whether that is technical, whether it's narratively, whether it's an idea. Somehow I think it should be inventive. I will go first with this because I think Wings is obviously very inventive. It literally invents brand new technology. It produces film and produces images that have never been created before in the medium of film. I think obviously Wellman is a very inventive filmmaker in general, but this, and granted, earlier films are probably going to have an advantage in this category than newer films. I was already thinking like, what are we going to say for Anora? Like, I don't know, that's not really inventive, but we'll get there in a couple years. Wings, at least, I think is very inventive. I gave it a full 5. I'll be honest. Like, I think it is inventive. What number were you at, and what are your thoughts?
I struggled with this more than anything else because I thought, well, yeah, I'm going to put it at a 4. And I mean, it's basically like the fight battles, the flight battle sequences. I love the swing shot that you mentioned earlier. I just love that every single time it moves, you see Buddy Rogers coming closer. For some reason, I just absolutely adore that. And of course, like the tracking shot in the club, the bubble sequence, which I think that was the only thing I kept encountering with people where they said like, "Oh my god, that sequence goes on for way too long." Fair enough. And then of course, like the synced sounds. There was some debate over like, oh, was there supposed to be synced sounds? And it's like, yes, there was a soundtrack of like planes and machine gun fire and stuff like that when you saw that in 1927, which was great. So I put it at a 4, but the only reason I'm giving it a 4 is that once again, it goes back to the fact that Carson and I are not film scholars, we're not historical scholars, and chances are there probably are some films that did some of these things first, but Wings is still really important as far as um, putting all of those things together and make like breaking through the mainstream where it's like, oh, this is the first time where a lot of people are seeing this and it actually becomes a part of film language. So solid 4 for me, but it's the only caveat is like, I just don't want
Oh.
to exclude anyone who's just like, oh, actually in 2020 1925 or something, someone did this first. And it's like, yeah, you're
Oh, and
probably right.
Lord knows we will get emails being like, "Oh, this happened." So,
Sure.
I also should say at the beginning of this, I should have mentioned like this is for fun.
Oh
Obviously,
yeah.
neither of us are historians. This is going to change, obviously, depending who's on the show. Like, this is meant purely for like very light fun. No one, please take this too seriously.
This
In
is just
fact, if
our
you
opinions.
disagree, and there will be times I guarantee in the series where like someone's at a 1 and someone's at a 5 per category, and that's fine. I would
Hmm.
encourage you at home, if you disagree, generate your scores, email us or message us or whatever, and let us know your thoughts. I would love to hear them. Next up is viewing quality. Obviously, you should be able to watch a Best Picture winner and find enjoyment. I was at a 4 for this category. It is longer, 2.5 hours. While it is very watchable, I do think there are some moments like the Clara Bow scenes, which are fine, but kind of like go, distract a little bit. And some scenes like the bubbles, I think you could say go a little bit long. So I couldn't go a full 5, but I personally went a 4. Where are you, Hillary?
I think I graded this on a different basis. I said as far as like a viewing quality, I gave it a 5, just because of like the how visually spectacular it is. But it does depend on what version you see. That is the biggest challenge I think anyone who's listening to this who has not seen it can encounter if they look for this film on their own, because there are so many versions out there that are really horrible looking or they have really bad score. So what I'd recommend, as far as looking for something online, this is in the public domain. So there are 2 uploads on YouTube at this point. One is at Echelon Studios, and then the other one is on a channel just called Classic Movies and Television. Very, very generic. But you should be looking for the 2012 restoration with the score by the original composer. And I wrote down notes because like I really want to pronounce his name correctly. So his name is John Stepa Zamesnik or Zamechnik. So everything you hear is what people heard when they saw it in the theaters, and then they had Skywalker Sounds redo all the sound effects. That's the way you should see it. If you see it at Echelon, you'll see it in the sepia tones, or like they tint things because it's supposed to be a tinted film. And then Classic Movies and Television, for some reason, it's in black and white. But just be very careful. You do want to see the film how it's supposed to be seen. I think the last time I watched it, I actually lost my mind because it was a version of the film where it was just the same piano song playing on a loop the entire 2 hours and 20 minutes. And I actually had to stop it and find another copy. So um, that's my recommendation for you. I think if you view it the way it's supposed to be, it's going to be spectacular. It should be a 5.
This might be horrible to say, like maybe it's going to be disgraceful to some people, but there's nothing worse than I've like tried to find a silent film and the upload on YouTube or whatever like doesn't have any audio. So I will go and I'll find another silent movie with audio and have the audio play in one and the
Oh
video in
no.
the other. Like it's horrible. Like you really, with silent films, you just got to do your best, I think, is like my moral. Like don't try to be perfect, just try to be the best you can. While Wings has a really clear and like beautiful, you can go see
Hmm.
this how it's meant to be, so many do not, and I find it so frustrating because then
Oh
it's like,
no.
how do I judge this movie when it's like everyone has different music, and I don't know, it's a million different issues, I guess, but it's fascinating. Our next category is representation of the year. I think the Best Picture winner should represent its year well. Hillary, I'll let you go first. Where are you on as far as how well Wings represents its year?
I put it as a 4 as well because there's so much. It's representing a very specific vision as far as like filmmaking and the kind of like feel good war we won thing. But as we've talked about before, there's so many things that came out during 1927 or technically 1928 because of the rules of the Academy Awards. There's so many other films that I feel are also representative. So it's definitely one of the top ones. But I mean, imagine you can watch Wings and you can watch, like I said, you can watch Metropolis, or we've mentioned The Crowd, all these different aspects of filmmaking at the time, as far as like worldwide filmmaking, that were absolutely incredible and like influenced things definitely, decades later to now. So
Yeah.
4, definitely.
I think that it's very clear to me that throughout the series, this is the category I'm going to struggle with the most because, like, number one, I'm not from 1927. So how do
No.
I know what's representative of the time? I know they're very big into flying. Lindbergh just did his flying over the Atlantic. So he's like becoming a celebrity. People love all that kind of stuff. But like to be representative of the year, like, okay, so people like flying, but this is like a period piece set 9 years before. How do people feel about the war now? I also went with a 4. I think that it does express a message about war that I think would resonate with people at the time as being very relevant. But I definitely was kind of all over on this as far as thinking it out. So I was also at a 4, though. With Legacy is our next one. I think a Best Picture winner should have a good legacy. I think it should stand the test of time. We've talked about this. I gave it a full 5. This is a film that to this day, 100 years later, 98 years later, but let's say 100 because it sounds nicer. People are literally actually not even 97 years later because this was 27, wasn't it? Yeah, the award
Hmm.
wasn't given out, whatever. This is a film that to this day people still watch, still enjoy. People who have never seen a silent film, who this is not necessarily their type of film that they seek out, they will watch this and enjoy it. I still find that it holds up wonderfully. There's still a lot to talk about within it. The messaging is still relevant. I don't know how you could get a much better legacy than what Wings has. What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's very close. I mean, personally for me, I think it should be a 5, but I think the only caveat against it, I'm using that word caveat a lot, is that it is a silent film. I think that its legacy, as far as like where it is now, the fact that people are still watching it is rather incredible, but I do wonder down the line how it will be able to hold up or if people will shy away from it more because it is silent, but it is still worth watching. It's one of those silent films where it's like, oh man, if you watch a silent film, definitely make this one of them.
Yeah, I don't know how this would translate to TikTok. That might be a jump, to be honest. So what number though would you be at? Were you at
Oh,
5 or are you at a 4?
I was at a 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I works for me. And then finally, how deserving is this film of winning the award, winning Best Picture? Does it have the merits to where this should have been rewarded and on that list that will live forever as being one of the best films, supposedly ever made, according to, I guess, the award body? Um, I went with a 4. I think it's deserving. I mean, I like the film. I think it's aged well. I think at the time it works. There's definitely a couple other films, and we've mentioned them, that I think you could make the argument for maybe being better than Wings or being above Wings. But I do think, even to be honest, and maybe this would push me to a 5, and I'm going to stay at a 4. I think I was voting in 1929 for the best, or 1928, whatever, for the best Academy Award, Best Picture. Um, I would probably still vote Wings just because of holistically the experience it provides, even over the films I like more. But just because there is that debate there, I gave it a 4. Where were you at?
I give it a 5 because and it's specifically because like deserving of the Academy Award, the Oscar, like as far as like the type of award it is, like that is a movie that wins the Oscar hands down, especially because the competition, it was only 3 films for that first ceremony. I have to say, when I looked it up and it said it was a 15-minute long ceremony, I thought like, oh, that's just, they had no idea just how long these ceremonies were going to get. Maybe we should go back to 15 minutes, you know? But it's, I think especially the first one, that it's an Academy Award, that it's an American film about American people, you know, fighting in an international war. It's just like, yeah, 5. Of course it's gonna win.
I love the fact also with the initial awards that it was very openly created as like a capitalistic thing. Louis B. Mayer, I have a quote I didn't read, but he was the one who founded the awards and like funded it all. And he was like, they will run through a door if you want to give them an award at the end. Like if you give them an award or you have this like allure of an award, they will work 3 times as hard for like
Oh
half
my
the pay.
god.
So I was like, oh, that's really depressing actually. Of
But
the
it's
start for the Academy
true.
Awards. Oh, it's so true. It's
Yeah,
so
it
true.
still holds up today. I'm sure that there's, I mean, there's so much we don't know that's behind the scenes, but I'm sure there's so many bitter actors and actresses who are like, I killed myself for that and I didn't even get a nomination and I hated it, you know?
Yeah, totally. And there's also, I will say, with this initial awards, at least, and I haven't necessarily done, so I don't know, like research on like number 2 or the 3rd Academy Awards or the 4th Academy Awards, but at least with this one, it was very like openly kind of politicked as far as the major awards. There was apparently a body who voted for the lesser awards, but even they were like, yeah, but for like the big ones, they kind of all came together and decided like, okay, this studio gets this, okay, this is going to
Oh
keep
my
him
God.
happy. So alas, I still think Wings deserves it. And according to us, 22 out of 25 is our final score when you take our averages between us, which I think is fitting. I, to
Yeah.
be honest, knew this was going to be a very high scoring one. There definitely will be ones that are lower scoring or all throughout the range, but I think when we look back, I genuinely think, and we'll see at the end of the series in a couple of years, we'll look back and Wings will still kind of be flying high as being maybe not the best picture winner, but certainly being a notable one and one that we really respect and I would say love. So with that, Hillary, thank you so much for joining us today to kick off this little series. Is there anything left with Wings you want to say, or if not, where can we find you online?
Oh, I think I've said everything I need to say. You can find me on Letterboxd. I think it's like the easiest way you can find me, which would be under the name Degelle, Degelle. If you go there, there is, a link under my username that will take you to kind of like a link tree of everything that I'm doing on the internet. And there will be a list on Letterboxd, of course, I called recommendations from podcasts. So anything I mentioned, like the list about Coney Island, I'm going to find the War Workers radio broadcast that I mentioned earlier, and anything else that I've mentioned ends up on that list. I just maintain it for fun.
Oh, it's great. And I will admit, I've referenced that Coney Island list when finding films to watch like quite a bit, to be honest.
Yeah, it's
So
great, isn't
go
it?
check it out. You also, I mean, Hillary won't put, yourself over. I get it. But you have so many great lists on there and so many great like recommendations. I know I also was looking for like some more obscure Pride watches, and you have some great lists for that. So like, and great recommendations overall. And you watch so much great stuff. So definitely check out Hillary on Letterboxd.
Oh,
I'm
thank
also
you.
on Letterboxd. Just I changed my name, everyone, on Letterboxd. Just thinking about digital impact and digital footprint. I'm now just Carson_movie on Letterboxd. You can find me on Twitter, I guess, BP_movie reviews, though it's privated and I don't tweet, so maybe don't do that. Blue Sky also, but I don't really use that. So alas, main place to find me is here on ClapperCast every week. If you want more of our Best Picture series, we'll be back next month. We're jumping a few years in advance, and we're covering Cavalcade next. That should be a very interesting episode. I think if you kind of were bored of us just gushing over a film and being like, this is a great film, Cavalcade is going to bring a very different energy, I fear. So we will get there next month. And then here on the podcast, Hillary, next week, you should, right now as if scheduled, and schedules change, but you and Jack will be back with me to discuss 28 years later, The Bone Temple. We did 28 years later. It feels like just yesterday we were talking about that film, and we're already back in the world. So I'm excited, but
yeah, we're gonna have to find out how many of Jack's predictions came true.
Yeah, well, and we'll see. I mean, I know the first one, literally, he still gives him nightmares. So we will see. Is this going to be a healthy experience even to go watch it? We'll see. It's going to be an adventure. But for that, thank you so much for listening and supporting ClapperCast. We will see you next time. Goodbye.